All right. Thank you for joining us once again for week 3, the public lecture course. The past 2 weeks we've been looking at shows that have happened in the past. And this week we'll be looking at, I say we.
Join us now.
I'm going to be up there as well.
Have a glass of wine and sit down.
Exactly. Sarah
No, don't say
and
things
Mark
like that.
will be talking about a show that has not opened yet, The Great Spectacle, which will be looking back at the 250 years of the summer exhibition at the Royal Academy. So join me in welcoming Sarah and Mark.
Great. Well, welcome back to, yes, indeed, the third of the series of lectures. And it is quite exciting now to be looking forward rather than backwards. And so we'll be telling you a rather different kind of story and providing you with rather different kinds of materials, because unlike last week when we were able to show you lots of installation shots of the exhibition itself and lots of reviews of the display on the part of critics and so on, this week we're looking ahead and we don't have any of that. But we'll be focusing much more this week then on the development of the project and our thoughts about it, and as well as the exhibition itself, or what we might think of as the exhibition itself. We'll be looking in a little more depth at the ways in which we've conceived this project as one which incorporates the exhibition alongside a range of other outputs or publications which we are very excited about organising and developing. So the first thing I want to say, though, is to welcome my colleague Sarah Turner, or Sarah Victoria Turner.
Oh, yes.
Which is very grand and much grander, but that's her proper title and her author's title.
Yes.
So Sarah and I...
My stage name.
Your stage name. We've been working together for many years, both at York and here at the Paul Mellon Centre, and it's been an absolute treat to not only to prepare tonight's lecture, but also to be working with Sarah on this exhibition. And it's interesting, this was our original title for the exhibition, The Great Spectacle, the Royal Academy and its Summer Exhibitions. But now, and I think quite interestingly, the Academy looked at this, and their marketing team looked at this and realised, can we find something that's got a bit more zing? And so they've renamed it The Great Spectacle. Well, that's been kept, but now it's been called or subtitled 250 Years of the Summer Exhibition, which I think actually is an interesting thing about something, a change like that, making quite a big difference in the character and the appeal of the show. So, Sarah, are you ready to go?
I'm ready.
Let's go. So, this is the first part of the lecture tonight is about the exhibition. And I said there are 3 parts. The catalogue we'll be moving on to deal with, and also this surprise package that we'll be leaving and saving up right until the end. You're used to that. So, the exhibition began, I think, at least for me and for Sarah, I think it was the summer of 2015, or it could have been the summer of 2014. Maybe, I'm not sure which one it was. But one morning that summer, I remember having an appointment with Charles Saumarez-Smith, Chief Executive and Secretary at the Royal Academy, who'd asked me to come along for breakfast at this place, Franco's in Jermyn Street. So I thought, wow, that's very nice. Looks a nice place. When I walked up to it, I thought, wow, that's a nice place to go for breakfast. But I wonder why Charles is inviting me. I had absolutely no idea. Anyway, he wanted to talk about the possibility, he raised the fact that the Royal Academy was going to be celebrating its 250th anniversary in 2018, and that the Academy was thinking about the ways in which it might celebrate and investigate that amazing history, that 250-year history. And one of the ideas he said that he had was to do an exhibition that would focus on the summer exhibition and the history of the summer exhibition, one of the great mainstay of the Academy's history and of its exhibition programme right from the beginning, from 1769. And very generously and kindly, he asked whether I'd be interested in doing this show, and also raised the possibility of myself doing this with Sarah. And I was really enthused by that possibility, and especially by the idea of working with Sarah, who's got a far greater knowledge of 19th and 20th century art than I do. And I thought we've worked so well together, and we've never done an exhibition together before. We've done so many other things.
Will we do another one?
I don't know. Yes, I will do. Yeah, I will. I would. But someone else. So we talked to each other about that, and maybe you can take over now, Sarah, because Charles brought up the possibility of an exhibition that would look at the history of the summer exhibition that would take place in 2018, always with the idea that it would be a counterpart to and work in tandem with this year's summer exhibition, so that it would open at the same time, and then it would close at the same time. But at that point, we weren't entirely sure quite where in the Academy it was going to be, what the format was, but then over time and quite quickly, with discussions with the Academy, we were able to, we were allocated a space and to start thinking about the spaces in which one works, with which one works. And that was a crucial thing in this instance especially. And the other thing to mention before we go on to that was that one of the things that Sarah and I both had to reckon with and think about was the fact that there had been a great exhibition on this topic, in a sense, in 2001 with the Art on the Line show that was curated by David Salkin in the Great Room at Somerset House. But that dealt with the initial early phase of the Academy's Summer Exhibition's history when it was at Somerset House. Our show, and Charles expected this and we expected this, was one that was need to cover the entirety of the Summer Exhibition's history. So this was our space.
Yeah, and I think this idea about the Summer Exhibition being the longest running exhibition of contemporary art in the world, or the longest running continuous exhibition of contemporary art in the world, a show every year of those 250 years, was something that really captured our imagination. And thinking about how you present that chronology through a visual and material argument, how do you ask your audience to walk round with you? And as you will know from visiting the recent summer exhibitions, it's a huge show. It's one of the biggest shows available for us to see in London and in the UK, over 1,000 works. So how would we distill 250 of those exhibitions into one single exhibition? And I think that conceptual and intellectual and very practical challenge has been something that we have just talked about continuously together, and then with the curators at the Academy. And so obviously the spaces in which the exhibition will be have really helped us clarify our thoughts and thinking about this narrative of a chronology. So we were given what are known as the fine rooms of Burlington House. And if you can imagine yourself, if you were in the courtyard, I'll see if this is the courtyard of Burlington House. So you walk through from Piccadilly and then you look up at Burlington House, and these are the fine rooms at the front of Burlington House, and sometimes they're open to members of the public to see the collection, but often they're closed, and they're actually used as the working rooms of the Academy, the council room, the saloon, the general assembly room. These are where the academicians gather and do business, so they're kind of working rooms. They're Grade 1 listed as well, very fine rooms, as the name says. And so we had these rooms, and you can see here we have the tenant room, and this is where our visitors will enter the exhibition. This will be our kind of introductory gallery, which we'll say a little bit more about. And then there's a logic to walking through this kind of enfilade suite of rooms here into the corridor, and then these are into the bigger exhibition galleries of Burlington House. We have the small Western Room and the large Western Rooms, galleries 2 and 1, and then out into the vestibule where the shop is, the all-important shop. So that's it. So when we're taking you around this exhibition tonight, you have to imagine yourself walking through this suite of galleries. So again, this is very much a journey that we wanted to go on with our visitors. And these are just some shots to show you the kind of historical character. So they're definitely not white cube galleries. They have a very prominent atmosphere, I think, and feeling. And you can see, again, we're dealing with quite prominent, very heavily gilded frames, mirrors. Again, we haven't got these big white walls to work with. So that conceptual challenge of what can we fit in was a very practical question for us from the start. And even in these galleries designed in the mid-19th century that we're showing on the right, which are much larger and have bigger wall space, again, they've still got a very particular atmosphere. And we were borrowing these galleries from the contemporary summer exhibition as well, which I think we'll say a little bit more about as well. So here we're going to show you, this is like we're sort of exposing our archive. Mark and I have been sort of rifling through our papers and, seeing what we can find. And it's been a really interesting experience, hasn't it, of kind of looking back across these few years of what we've been scribbling together and thinking about, again, how do we tell this story of 250 years of the summer exhibition? And you'll get to recognise what my primary school head teacher called your extravagant handwriting, Sarah. So I've kind of developed
extravagant
that.
but readable.
Yeah. It's a good job I was taking some of these notes, not Mark.
Yeah.
And so you can see already we're MLH and SVT. We're already devising and dividing up the workload. Who's going to do what? Trying to think again about how we divide the years up. And this has changed a little bit, hasn't it? Yeah. But some of the basics about landscape, telling the story about the pre-Raphaelites, moving through into the 20th century. Yeah. And here you can see this space. This is called the lecture room. There was a kind of idea that we might use that as a kind of shared space with the 2018 summer exhibition. I have to say that hasn't happened. In these kind of negotiations about space and how the 2018 summer exhibition will actually fit in with us taking away these rooms as well.
But
and they've got an expanded
and
the Sackler Gallery. So, but it's been really interesting, kind of that process of working alongside Grayson Perry as the coordinator of the 2018 exhibition. Yeah. And it's just, again, this interesting negotiation about what will fit where, how can they accommodate that. So that sort of shows that nicely.
And it's just worth saying that, as Sarah says, the historic rooms meant that the earlier sections of the show, in which we wanted to combine a chronological narrative with thematic focus, was often going to be taking place in rooms that would hold 5, 6, 4 paintings, no more, a piece of sculpture perhaps. So we really had to distill things down. And one of the realizations that we had very early on was that we weren't going to be able to reproduce that very, very dense collage-like hang across our exhibition. Can you imagine how many works that would require us to borrow and loan and insure? So and this is also something that emerged in conversation with and collaboration with our internal curators at the Royal Academy. It's worth mentioning this. At this stage, Sarah and I were still very much working on our own and thinking aloud, but then we started having conversations with Per Rumberg at the Royal Academy and Anna Testar, who's an assistant curator there. And with Per and Anna, we've really devised this exhibition collectively. And then similarly, we also recognise that to give ourselves the chance to do all the different aspects of this exhibition well, we would also want to bring in our colleague Jessica Feather, who helped devise a very important part of the exhibition, which was that dealing with architectural drawings, which have been a constant part of the summer exhibition right from its origin. So the thing that Sarah and I always realised and have come to realise and appreciate is an exhibition, and you've been picking this up over the last few weeks, is such a collaborative enterprise. It involves so many people that the curator is only part of a much bigger project. So yes, as I was saying, there are quite a lot of challenges in relation to thinking about the historic rooms and about how we might organise the show. But you can see that we started putting some written preliminary proposals together. This again was a very early, scrappy preliminary proposal. You can see that we're still not sure about its title. There's a little bubble around the title going, should we call it The Great Spectacle? That was an initial idea that was scribbled in, I think, and has remained the case. We've got the preliminary exhibition proposal, and then you see our first thoughts about what would go into all the different galleries in the provision gallery plan on the right. But as you can see, it was very uncertain, tentative, and we move on.
We're even not sure about the date.
Yeah, it looks like it was 2018.
I think we kept counting when was the 250th summer exhibition, because people kept saying, is it really 18, or is it 19, or is it 17? Yeah, so I think that must be what you're reassuring us there. That
we've got the right year, I'm sure. And then, as you can see, we started developing this, and by the time, over a few weeks and months, we were through these conversations, had the chance to really put together much more detailed proposals about what the show might contain. And then, of course, this got us going and thinking about the loans. And again, working with Per and with Anna, we really began the process of selecting works to display in this very distilled way. What we wanted to do was to choose works that told a story about the summer exhibition, about which we can tell a story, and that really stood out as worthy of note. So, as Sarah says, it was about choosing from hundreds of works, thousands of works, even millions of works, if you think about it over its entire history, to choose from for the show.
And I think we're quite conscious as well that with this exhibition operating alongside the 2018 exhibition, if people wanted to see both in one day, that often people describe the summer exhibition as quite overwhelming. And so we wanted to kind of give a different rhythm and a different pace to the summer exhibition as well. So again, thinking about that idea about, the beat of an exhibition, how you move through it, its rhythms, I think has been really important to us in again, conceptualising this narrative of moments in its history.
Yeah. And so what we're going to do now is just show you some of the works that we've requested and managed to get for the show, and to take you on a very, very brief summarised tour of the show before we'll tell you about these are the works that we decided upon and requested, and we've been lucky enough for the main part to look forward to seeing at the show itself. And how we begin the show is that we can't duplicate those very dense, crowded hangs across the exhibition, but we really wanted in the first room, didn't we, Sarah, to introduce visitors to the long history of these very crowded hangs and displays that are so characteristic of the summer exhibition.
And the idea of spectacle.
And the idea of spectacle, the great spectacle. So we begin actually in the tenant room, that first room that you saw, showing a number of prints and works of art that really dramatise that sense of the, as all of you, all of you will already have seen, of course, from when we did the 18th century discussions and exhibitions, those early exhibitions, and of course, this character of the crowded hang has run right through the display since its history. And so in that first room, we really want to alert the viewer and the visitor to the fact that the summer exhibition is taking place in 4 different venues: Pall Mall, Somerset House, Trafalgar Square, and Burlington House. That it's been pictured at different stages of its history. It's got tweaks and shape and differences to its appearance, but fundamentally, that first earliest image that you see there on the left, the first ever image of a summer exhibition from 1771, an image of the room the great room in Pall Mall. Even today, when you walk into a summer exhibition, there's still something of that same character that was there in the late 18th century, and it's remained remarkably loyal to those fundamental principles of bringing together works of art by professional artists, by academicians, and by artists who are outside the academy and who are wanting to break into the art world. Do you want to say a word or two about these?
Yeah, well, we one of the things that we really wanted to communicate about this exhibition is it's always been about the visitor as well. It's a social event across its 250 years, and critics and artists and satirists have really sort of enjoyed and revelled in this aspect of it being a kind of key focus, a key moment in the art world in the summer. And we wanted to get that idea again of people coming into the exhibition. And so this lovely John Russell pastel of the porter welcoming the visitor, and here he's holding up this lovely blue ticket, one of the early tickets to the exhibition. So again, getting that idea about exhibition history. And there's been a kind of incredible flowering, I think, over the last few years in research on exhibition histories, and how looking at an exhibition can tell us something different about the art world, about visitors, about institutions, about the networks, the infrastructures that make art happen, what happens when it's displayed to the public. And so in this first room, again, we wanted to get the sense that visitors are just as important, really, as artists to this show. And there's a kind of dynamic, a transaction, a relationship. And, of course, this wonderful Rowlandson captures, again, that social spectacle of the crush, the excitement of these visitors in the late 18th century, early 19th century, trying to get up the staircase of Somerset House to pile in and tumbling back down. And again, there's that kind of social satire, isn't there? Yeah. Kind of poking fun at those visitors as well.
But yeah, there's been such a long tradition of satire about the summer exhibition visitors. Interesting, on your left, you see behind the porter, you see the crowd starting the ascent of the stairwell. Yeah. And on the right-hand side, you get that same crowd being satirised. And of course, It's a satire that, as very typical of Rawlinson, it plays on, you know, the idea of connoisseurship and close looking can sometimes slip between close looking and connoisseurship of paintings and of beautiful young women on the part of these old, lecherous, disabled, pretty gross group of visitors. And so satire and spectacle are brought together here really brilliantly, I think. And so we wanted, as Sarah says, wanted to excite viewers and visitors with that sense of spectacle. Of course, we hope they'll be contributing to a spectacle of their own in the summer.
I was just going to say, about, he's holding the catalogue as well, we think, don't we? So, again, these kind of important parts of the exhibition, the tickets, the catalogues, the kind of, what are often called ephemera, exhibition ephemera, but I think they're actually, somehow that doesn't seem to signal their importance to me in their weighty materiality that is really significant in relationship to the summer exhibition in that idea of documenting an event, which we'll kind of return to in our archive material.
We then move into, in the Reynolds room, which is one of the bigger of the historic rooms, we'll be focusing on the Georgian summer exhibition and some of the works that were on display there. And it was an amazing period for exhibition portraiture on the part of artists like Reynolds and Gainsborough. And we have a spectacular collection and display of Reynolds' paintings, Gainsborough's portraits, and then also portraits by figures like Thomas Lawrence. So it's a really dramatic room in which we talk about the ways in which the exhibition portrait played an enormous role in that period. But also it was a period in which contemporary history paintings or works of art dealing with contemporary military and social and political crisis really did form an important strand of the exhibition display. And that's been one of the things that we've realised doing the research for this show, is the way in which throughout its history the exhibition and the paintings it contains have often responded really fascinatingly to different kinds of political and military crisis, including the wars in the Americas in this instance and subsequent conflicts. And then, to take you through quite quickly, we move from the Reynolds room to two successive, quite small displays of, on the one hand, genre painting, and we were again lucky enough to have this great David Wilkie, Chelsea Pensioners painting, which caused one of the first great crushes at the exhibition, where it was so busy that I think a rail had to be erected in front of it. It disturbed the flow of visitors around the exhibition because so many people wanted to come and see it and inspect its incredibly detailed and dramatic contents. But also then the exhibition became the place in which the great landscape artists of the early and mid-19th century worked and displayed their work. We of course think of Turner and Constable, but we're also pleased to be displaying an amazing work by Girton, for instance. And we dramatise the sense that the exhibition space in the early and mid-19th century was a place in which this great generation of landscape painters, all of whom born within a few years of each other, were displaying their works in a spirit of emulation and rivalry, and seeing this category of landscape painting becoming really central to the story, not only of the exhibition, but of British art.
And we're sort of continuing that theme as the exhibition as a place where artistic friendship and rivalry was put on prominent display. One of our rooms tells a story of the pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood and how important the summer exhibition really was for launching their careers, and the critical response which was met, or which these paintings met with, was really through the Academy, through critics going to the Academy and seeing a very radically new kind of painting. And again, part of our story is about, why did these works by people like Millet and Hunt, why did they look so different when you see them, when visitors in the mid-19th century saw them on the walls in that visual cacophony of the summer exhibition? What made them so different? Why did they call out? And why did people take notice of these very young artists putting these kind of manifestos about a new kind of painting, a very kind of precise, jewel-like, often taking subjects from either medieval romance or Keats, using kind of a new literary subject? Why did they make such an impact? So we're really exploring those kind of, again, friendships and networks which were formed through the Academy. And quite interestingly, there's sort of kind of sub-stories that come through all of these works. Millet, for example, had been the youngest ever student at the Royal Academy schools, entering just age 13. And here he is in his early 20s, kind of putting this work on show. So again, the role of the Academy schools in developing and promoting an academy tradition, and then how that was either celebrated or enhanced through the summer exhibitions, or disrupted, questioned, and negotiated in the case of the pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. And then thinking about, we've got the Frith here, just to talk about really, again, the idea of the development of the Academy in the Victorian period. This is really the heyday in many ways of the Academy in terms of incredible visitor numbers, particularly from in the sort of late part of the 19th century. We're talking over 300,000 people and coming to this exhibition, sometimes 375,000. I mean, exhibition curators today would kill for those figures. I mean,
we would kill for that.
Yeah.
We would probably die.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, we're talking like the blockbuster. It is, you know, these paintings, I guess it's equivalent to the film that everybody has to go and see. I mean, it's just, I think, again, that idea of crush, of piling in, of you have to go and see this with your own eyes, or if you're not in London, if you're elsewhere in the world, how these images were then disseminated through the press. And what we have happening alongside this kind of growth of the summer exhibition is a growth in press criticism, in the illustrated press, and so dissemination about how images displayed for the first time to the public as objects in the summer exhibition then left the walls. How were they disseminated? Through reproduction, through copies, sometimes illegal copies as well. And again, the Thrift painting, Ramsgate Sands, is another example of having to be roped off, having a guard stand by it, because so many people wanted to go and read this narrative. To kind of a strange viewing experience, really, of a kind of Victorian cross-section of society at leisure, sort of looking at themselves on holiday, looking at themselves when they've gone to the sort of metropole and to this event. So again, this painting, I think, captures this idea about event. And then we've kind of walked through and thinking about how we communicate the histories of the summer exhibition in the 20th century. And I think in many ways this is some of it's in the sort of early to mid 20th century, perhaps some of the most challenging moments of the Academy's life. I'm looking at Melanie Vasey there, who's writing her PhD about sculpture. Oh, she's finished. Woo! That's a good moment. But again, that sort of, there's a kind of the Academy's troubled relationship to the histories of modernism and modern art becomes something that I think has been somewhat caricatured as well. So we wanted to get across the diversity of painting that was on display at the Academy in the 20th century and think about some of the artists who use the Academy to show their art, and particularly women artists in this period. In the 20s and 30s, 1930s, that is, there's a growth of women, numbers of women artists exhibiting at the Academy, although they had been regular exhibitors from the founding and its opening show. Although this woman that we're showing here, next to her canvas, this incredible portrait of friendship, this is Dame Laura Knight. And this portrait is of her friend Samuel Lamorna Birch and his daughters. Interestingly, this was a painting that she made in 1913, and then she exhibited it at the Academy in 1934. And that's something that we've found through our research, actually. A lot of artists were kind of recycling images or deciding when to put them into the Academy. There's kind of quite strategic decisions. But again, Knight became the first woman since the founding of the Royal Academy to be elected as a full RA, as a woman artist. There had been two women in the first year, Mary Moser and Angelica Kaufmann in 1768, who were women artists who were RAs, and then it wasn't until 1934 that another woman is elected as full RA. Annie Swinnerton had been made ARA in the 1920s, but again, I think we're trying to access some of those institutional and social histories of the art world, which the summer exhibition allows us to explore, and those challenges, those difficult histories as well. Why was that? When so many women were exhibiting, were using it as a prominent public display space. And I think as well we have to put this into context, that there weren't the number of dealers, art dealers, that there are today. the dealer system was only really sort of burgeoning in the early 20th century. So the Academy remained really, really fundamentally important for a lot of artists as a place to show and to, importantly, sell their work. So that's the story we're telling, really, through this work. And again, these wonderful archive images that display Laura Knight with all those male, pale and stale men.
We also wanted to flag up the issue of the amateur artist. It's quite interesting because, of course, the summer exhibition, even today, is associated very much with the amateur who sends in their work of art and finds, to their delight, that they've been either accepted or far more regularly rejected. What's quite interesting is that we found, for the most part, most of the figures who find that their works do get exhibited at the Academy are practicing artists. That idea of the Sunday painter, the amateur who's really only does it in their spare time, managing to get places on the wall is quite rare, quite exceptional. But one very famous amateur painter that we have decided to include and to represent, as it were, that great crowd of figures who submit works and not always successfully, but in his case successfully, is of course Winston Churchill. And he exhibited this painting in 1947, as you see, under an assumed name, David Winter. Not exactly the most exciting original disguise, but it's quite interesting to think of Churchill exhibiting as an amateur at the summer exhibition. He, of course, has had a very close relationship with the Academy and its summer exhibitions, and it is, again, interesting that throughout much of its history, and especially in the 19th and the early 20th century, and through into the post-war period, the Academy had a very close tie or part to play within the establishment and had very close links with the political and governing elites. And then, of course, we wanted to dramatise the fact that sometimes great paintings did get rejected, and one of the most famous is, of course, Wyndham Lewis's portrait of T.S. Eliot, which was rejected in 1938. And so we're actually exhibiting this painting. It's coming all the way from Durban. We're really proud and pleased to have got this painting. This is one of the ones that, rather like Christine said to you last week, made us jump in the air a bit. And we're thrilled to get this as part of the display. But it really, again, dramatises the fact that sometimes quite a lot of controversy and scandal was generated around rejection as much as admission of works of the display.
The summer exhibition, as you all will know, is not just an exhibition of painting, and sculpture, miniatures, architectural drawing, and the kind of now film and moving image photography are an important part of its history. Although painting has dominated across its history, we really wanted to kind of dramatise and kind of emphasise the kind of mixed media of the exhibition, and often, again, the challenge that has provided the Hanging Committee particularly with, and so sculpture has always caused a little bit of a headache, I think, for many members of the Hanging Committee, and lots of sculptors were really always furious when they went into the show and like, oh, you can't get round the back of my three-dimensional object. So again, how artists are reacting to their works on display. But one of the wonderful pieces, and again, this is a mixed media sculpture in its own right. This work by George Frampton, Lamia, exhibited in the 1900 summer exhibition, was actually called out by critics as the work of the year. It's often called the picture of the year. So it's quite interesting when you have a piece of sculpture, how people actually took notice and called this work kind of enchanting. It created this sort of quiet, still moment in an otherwise frenetic and busy exhibition. And as Mark mentioned, our colleague Jessica Feather has been working on architecture and the Academy, which again has a very long and fascinating history. And we're telling that primarily through architectural drawings, of which we've got incredible loans. And this rarely leaves the Sir John Soane Museum. So we're really excited again to see this recontextualise what happens when we put works back in the Academy. Can we find out new things about them and access understandings about how they were displayed and received when they were put on display for the first time.
And I hope you're getting a sense that our idea was also that, and a recognition that the history of the summer exhibition and a walk through the summer exhibition is also a walk through the history of British art. I mean, you're really seeing some that I think, again, today people might not always realise that for a great part of its history, as Sarah says, it was the place that all the great majority of leading artists would want to display their work. And so we do have this astonishing, rich tapestry or strand of work that tells a broader history of British art as well as that of the exhibition itself. And so I think it's appropriate that in this anniversary year that we really get a sense to recognise that, the richness of that history.
Might be some surprises too, because I think there's often a kind of, again, this narrative that a lot of artists in the 20th century, they don't want to show at the Academy, like Henry Moore, for example, Barbara Hepworth, not going there, thank you very much. It's not modern. It's not seen as modern enough or avant-garde enough. But then when you start to look through the history and look through the catalogues, you're like, hang on a moment, Frank Bowling, 1966, you know, I didn't know that. Or Peter Blake, pop. That's also really interesting. 62, what's going on here? How did that look in 62 in the exhibition? So again, just thinking about some of these really spectacular works, and again, the Bowling painting is huge, and it is an Academy picture in many ways. It's one of those kind of grand machines. It's meant to make a real impression on a crowded wall. And again, for me, putting that work back in, why was a young student who's made his name, won the silver medal for painting at the RCA, you know, what's he doing exhibiting at the Academy? What's in it for him? How does it look amongst his peers? And I think the same with Blake. How's pop being displayed? How's British art of the 60s? How does the Academy and the exhibition respond to it?
And then we bring it right up to date with the works of artists like Kitaj, and this remarkable work that he exhibited. Or this is a part of an installation that he produced for the 1997 Royal Academy exhibition, which was this astonishing attack on the critics that he'd seen Savage, his own retrospective show at the Tate, a few years beforehand, and that he saw as having killed his wife, whose wife died soon after this retrospective exhibition of Kitaj's work, in which he and his work were savaged mercilessly by many, many critics. And then soon afterwards, Sandra Fisher, the artist and partner of Kitaj, has died. And Kitaj was convinced, as a lot of you will know, that this was something that had been caused in part, at least, by the stress and the anger to which Kitaj himself had been subjected. And so he produces this remarkable piece of work called, in this instance, A Killer Critic Assassinated by His Widow, even, which alludes to the whole history of 20th century art, to Duchamp, in its imagery to the work of artists like Manet and the killing and the execution of Maximilian. And then what was also fascinating about it was in many ways a really innovative mixed media piece, which brought together covers of Penguin books, texts, photographs alongside painting, and it really made a very dramatic impact in '97. And it's interesting, that's also the year of the Sensation Show, which a lot of you all know, the great YBA exhibition at the Royal Academy, which directly followed that year's summer exhibition, in which Kitaj's work had been the standout exhibition picture of the year. And so much of that energy and disruptiveness and iconoclasm of that Sensation Show did find its way into the Academy in subsequent years. And of course, Tracey Emin now has become a well-established member of the Academy itself. And we wanted to show and dramatise this move that she's made, and that this kind of work, the YBA work that we associate with this particular group of artists, has come into the Academy. And to talk about the ways in which the Academy itself and the summer exhibition itself has really responded to the changing art world in Britain. But there are a few that got away.
Yes.
So we thought, we have to show you some of our failures as well as the successes. Yeah, well, we were assured that we would get Miss Farron from the Met.
Mark was so excited.
I was very excited about that painting. But look, we've got a fantastic, for very good reasons, the Met wasn't able to lend.
I think we can say why.
Well, yes, we can, can't we?
Do you not?
Yeah, go on.
Well, I like how I'm going to say it. I'll be in trouble. And again, because of the space, the doors are very, very small. And it's a listed building. So we can't be taking off doors, and this is a very tall painting, and trying to get it in was going to be.
It was about the climate and the environment.
Yeah. So the Met decided that it wasn't. They couldn't send it on that long journey, and then just getting it into the building, I think, into that room would have been too difficult for such a big painting.
And we thought the monarch might sort of wander down from the hills and come and join us in Burlington House. But
you might have heard, and this has been bought for the nation it was owned by the Scottish Whisky Company. But again, because of the terms of the grants through which it's been purchased, it needs to tour Scotland as well. So that was a bit of a shame.
So we've been going through this up and down, topsy-turvy time in terms of loans that we wanted, a number of things that we've asked for getting rejected, us having to think on our feet about, well, at least there are lots of options and alternatives. It's not as if we're short of works to choose from. And we're really, really happy with this final list of works and about the way in which it's all distributed, the whole thing is all distributed across the different gallery spaces. But then, of course, it's about how we arrange it, all the things that we talked a bit about last week. So we'll move on to the mechanics of putting this exhibition together. And one of the things that the Royal Academy and Anna and Per, I mentioned already, helping us with, provided these diagrammatic renderings of the different walls of all the different galleries, and also, very helpfully, these thumbnail images of the pictures themselves. And we started, as it were, sticking them on those walls and wondering where they go. You can see what I thought about which way around we should put the pictures. I can't remember what we ended up deciding. But you can see the ways in which we'll try, and this is not the layout, the final layout that we have, but we were trying out different ideas about the display and thinking about the logic of each room, how the visitor would walk around, out today would walk around them, what kinds of pictures and combinations of pictures would work. So this was one stage of things, when we had, as it were, paper diagrammatic sheets to work with, and we did this for every wall in every gallery, so we had these huge piles of paper. And then there was a kind of dramatic moment when we had a meeting at the Royal Academy, and Sarah and I had a chance to not only see paper, but to see something a bit more concrete, or at least cardboard. Do you want to say, there's lots of photographs you're going to be seeing over the next few minutes, none of which Sarah appears, because she was always taking them, and they're all on her camera. Yeah. So you always have to imagine that Sarah's standing there, the boss basically, and controlling the discussion while she's taking the photographs. But this is quite interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, and I don't think there was a model for the fine room, so they had to make one for this exhibition, and it just again changed our approach, I think, or perspective, kind of quite literally looking into this kind of doll's house version of the galleries. So just a very practical moment of just seeing those visual relationships and how people would react and interact with the works.
So working with our designer Ian, and you can see there on the right that's Anna, and then lifting up this model onto the table, that's Per Rumberg, as I said, who we've been working with. Yeah. And we'll just show you that it's quite interesting. This is nice. What, do you want to say a word about this? Yeah, this is.
Again, you can see the correlation between this work and then bringing it into the gallery and where to place the sculpture. And again, Per was so interesting about this because we were like, let's put loads in. And he was like, you've got to imagine a busy day with hundreds of people trying to get through these rooms. He's like, I'm afraid you can have one. And I was like, one sculpture for the 20th, that part of the 20th century. And sort of, this kind of, you think, well, how do you tell this story? So again, the selections and thinking about Frink as, she was sort of potentially in the running, sort of tipped to be the first female president of the RA, but she died, and that was, so again, these kind of lost histories and institutional histories. So we thought this was an interesting way to tell that story about sculpture, and again, the importance of the body, and casting and drawing and sculpting from the idea of life and the nude, being again these themes that we've tried to stitch through the exhibition, I think, haven't we? Like portraiture, landscape, and not make it too heavy-handed, but they're there, those themes and those histories run, quite literally, through the gallery.
And this again was interesting because you can see this is Wolfgang Tillmann's work that will be in many ways the final work that you'll see, and you can see there in that model the ways in which we decided to place it as the work that you see as you walk through from gallery 2 into gallery 1 into the final gallery, and it'll be this spectacular almost sunset or sunrise right at the end, this astonishing abstract work that he produced that was shown in 2014, and again one that demonstrates the range and the ambition of the current displays and the artists who are currently displaying at the exhibition.
And that won the Charles Wollaston Award as well, which is a really significant art prize. Isaac Julian won it last year, established by an art teacher, Charles Wollaston, in 1978. So the prizes of the exhibition are quite significant, and they provide their own interesting history of who's won the award and what kind of media the work is.
And so we, as well as thinking about the display of the works that we'd asked for and loaned, we actually also wanted to show a work by the current president. We've got works by Reynolds, the first ever Royal Academy president. So we've also decided to invite Christopher Lebrun, the current Academy president, to show a work of his. And Sarah and I and Per went to visit Christopher at his studio, and this is us deciding upon which of the Very flamboyant and cool pose that
I
Per
love
was in,
this
isn't it?
photo of Per. I said he looks like our 18th century dancing master. You know, it looks like we're about to
Sorry, Per,
enter
if he's
into a
watching
little,
this.
a
But,
little dance with him,
yeah.
which, of course, all collaboration is a dance of kinds, isn't it?
Is. Do you want to say
Yeah.
a word or two about this? Yeah.
So, other people, there's been an amazing cast of characters involved in this exhibition and helping us with the research for it. And this is a kind of shout out really for the staff of the Academy's archive and library, particularly the archivist Mark Pomeroy, who you see there, and Adam Waterton, the librarian, and the collections staff. There's too many people to name, but this just shows like the kind of how research has informed our decisions. And we spent a lot of time looking at the amazing collections of the Academy's archive and library and thinking how can we incorporate the idea of an exhibition's history into our own exhibition. So we're creating a visual chronology through archive and library material in the exhibition itself. Again, showing the visitor what incredible resources there are in the Academy for the study of the history of this exhibition.
So there'll be a timeline with objects, all this, the kinds of materials that we're looking at here, including things like we'll be dramatising in one of the spaces the amazing posters that are such an important part of the...
I love this poster on the right, the Betty Swanwick showing Reynolds and Kaufman having a look at abstraction. Mark's not so sure. Again, you might be getting the sense that we don't agree on everything,
No, we don't.
which is really good because we've had some, well, we haven't had you know, some good, robust discussion.
We have.
I was going to say
Robust
humdingers, but I think robust discussion is
More
correct.
hum
But,
indeed.
yeah.
Okay. But do you want to
Yeah.
I mean, in the research, and this is Mark Pomeroy as well, isn't it? He's
Yeah.
the archivist at the Academy. He's found such amazing
Yeah,
things in the
one
collection.
day he came out and he was so excited. He said, have you seen these exhibition drawings from the 1850s? And there's this set of incredibly, exquisitely drawn, showing the exact location of every work and also its catalogue number. These little numbers here.
So it'll be a bit. Remember, we saw those in the first week. Those the Sambi, the Thomas Sambi drawings. From
Yeah.
well, that's that, but kind of come alive, or at least done in this very unusual way, with which opens out to show every wall and every corner.
And they only exist for about, I think it's 3, maybe 4 years, because I think, it was kind of unbelievably time-consuming. And although, interestingly, photography was invented at this moment, although photographing inside in those conditions would have been, just about possible, but those photographs don't exist for that
really
period.
interesting.
Yeah.
There's no installation photographs for the summer exhibition, we think, right through into the 1970s. It wasn't something that the Academy saw itself as wanting to do.
I think
So-
because it's organised so quickly
Yeah.
every year, it's the turnarounds really
we
fast.
read the council minutes saying, this year we're deciding to take photographs of the show. 1977. It would have been nice to have had this in 1877. But also, we've been watching the build-up, haven't we, Sarah?
Yeah.
And so it's been interesting. We talked about this last week, about the ways in which the press alerts readers and starts exciting readers about events. And so we're lucky enough to have a lead story in the art newspaper and also a piece in The Guardian that's hopefully got people interested and excited and started publicising the display. So that's really the exhibition. That's what we've been, and of course it hasn't happened yet. We hope it'll be a great success. But always we've been thinking and been asked to think about not only the show and the organisation of the show, but of course for us as scholars, but also for the Academy, wanting to have a catalogue that will really do the show justice. And so Sarah and I, again working in tandem with our colleague Jessica Feather, have been working on the catalogue to the show. And this was, I think, some of the first thoughts that you put down, weren't they, Sarah?
Yeah.
About how we... And it's very... If I can sort of jump over your text, if you don't mind. Just one thing that's really interesting for us, because the Academy wanted a book, and a catalogue that was also a book that would tell the history of the summer exhibition. Okay, so we said fine, but it also has to be a catalogue. So we have to reproduce and hopefully discuss the works that are in the show. So I don't know if you can get that. It's quite a challenge to write a history and a catalogue where you're not that you don't feel that you're kind of confusing the issues. So we had to tell the history of the summer exhibition through the works that we've displayed. Luckily enough, we had such wonderful lens that we could do that. But it meant that in every chapter, every part of our writing, we're having to think about the bigger points and the bigger histories that the pictures that we'd chosen or been lucky enough to get told. It wasn't as if you had a straight history to write or a straight catalogue to put together. We had to try and do something that was a bit of both, didn't we, Sarah?
Yeah. And stitch our text together as well, our words. So it feels like a seamless narrative, and there's an evenness to our writing. And so here you can see again more notes from the archive about our meetings with the RA Publications team, Nick Tite and Peter Sawbridge, who really guided us through this whole process of writing this book. And again, the things that we're just playing with here, the deadline particularly, made us sweat a bit.
That's exactly a year, wasn't it, that we had to write it. A couple of things, again, I think we've talked maybe about this before, but maybe not. We were told this book is going to be 220 pages long, or maybe 224. That's it. So we're writing to very specific. And that's the other thing. We said when we walked in, I think if you go back to Sarah's plan, it's like 5,000 words a chapter, 5,000 each. Nick and Sarah said, forget that. Nick and Peter said. So you can see, look at that box below, down below. 40,000 words. It wasn't going to happen. So we were supposed to stick to 40,000 words. It couldn't be more than 40,000 words. They drummed that into, and we sort of listened, didn't we?
Yeah.
And so anyway, then we went to work. We had to do a lot of research. It's new to both of us. I mean, we knew quite a lot about certain parts of the history, but not about lots of others. So this is Sarah going to work with her extravagant but very legible handwriting.
Yes, and I don't know what the colour coding is significant, but I obviously decided I'd do that. Yeah, and just some of the ideas that have really stuck with me. Again, this idea that often in histories about the 19th century and the 20th century, they're separated, and the Victorian and the modern go to war. And I thought, well, actually, there's some really interesting histories of continuity across the summer exhibition. So that was one of the ideas. And I said, this dialogue between the Victorian and the modern has to be told. It still needs further research. It needs new work. So I got excited about, there's lots of new things that can be done. What else did I get excited about? Oh, yes, social I love social events. So I think that was my, this idea about private views. The first press day in the world was invented at the summer exhibition. A private view day for Queen Victoria loved the summer exhibition, so she wanted a private day for the royal family to go and she bought a lot of works, and some of the works from the royal collection, like the Frith, will be in the show. So
these are Sarah's notes. So we could be graphologists for a moment. Look at those Ys and the openness and the expansiveness and the interest and the wide-ranging set of preoccupations on Sarah's. Then we come to me. And look how tight and idle it is. Sorry, shouldn't really say that about myself. But
it's like a therapy session, this one.
And look, you can see what I'm most worried about is how many words each section is. 400 words, 500 words, 500 words. But Sarah pointed out, this is a bit like a little exhibition gallery in its own right. This is my plan for chapter 1. And you can see that in the first section, the 250 words.
This is, your dense hang.
My very dense hang with my very dense handwriting. You can see there's that big, long, rectangular box is the Brandywine and Earlham print you see there on the right. So, and a bit further down in section 1, Angelica K, that's Angelica Kaufman. You can see H&A, that's Hector and Andromache, which is the painting that you see below there too. So that was my plan, and this is us going to work basically and putting out writing together in very, very different ways.
What we'd do is we'd write our chapters and then we'd swap them. And it's sort of like going back to school. You're like, will Mark Hallett like my work? And, it's sort of...
A+, always.
But it's that kind of, again, what's collaboration? How do you work together? These kind of processes are really, I think, interesting for that.
And so we ended up with, this is the final list that Nick and Peter Sawbridge put together about our texts. And just to mention that, again, Jessica wrote a chapter on exhibition. And the other thing, we did chapters with these little short insets to follow each chapter. And you can see the contract, you see that list, that first column. These are the words we were supposed to have written. 3,500, 500, 3,500. And then the next column is actual. Look, so chapter 2, the rise of genre painting, 3,500. Actual, 4,500. So even me with my crazy anal number crunching didn't get there. And then when we get to Sarah Victoria Turner, Victorian acclaim, Sarah Victoria acclaim, 3,500, 4,991. Next chapter, 5,383. She went wild. But the scariest thing of all is the final total. 66666. And it's in red. It was too demonic for words. We thought, what is going on here? And that's the actual total.
I think that was Nick and Peter were like, this is crazy,
Maybe that was a little sign from them.
Yeah.
They were playing the devil's advocate in that.
So we reined ourselves in, didn't we?
We had to rein ourselves in.
That was hard, actually. Because there's so much to say. Trying to sell the whole... For me, I was like, from the 1850s to 1900 in 4,000 words. I mean, it really was difficult.
Good challenge. Well, we just about made it, didn't we? So
Yeah.
ultimately, and thankfully, Nick and Peter, we came to a kind of compromise, didn't we? We wanted 60 plus, or we got to 60 plus, 6666. They wanted 30.
Magic
well,
number.
not quite. And we ended up with something in the mid-50s. So I think we did all right in the end, didn't we?
yeah.
And so, and now, just right now, today and yesterday,
Yeah.
we've started getting the layouts for the book. So this is hot off the press, and there's no doubt these layouts will change, but you can start seeing the way in which the catalogue will look. And again, these are moments when all that work that we put into writing, and it was done very, very intensively, as always, and in all the spare evenings and weekends and early mornings we could find, outside everything else we're trying to do, to write these things. But when you get the layouts and you see the stories being told and the illustrations in the layouts, you do get a really good sense of satisfaction. And I think that this will be a very beautiful book, whatever the writing's like. I mean, at least half the writing will be very good. But the book is so beautifully illustrated and designed by Peter and Nick and the team at the Royal Academy that it will offer a really wonderful history.
Yeah.
And I think, actually, it's going to be very interesting to read as well, I have to say that. So this is one layout, and then I just wanted to show you one of these insets that Jessica wrote, which is, of course, dealing, in this instance, with that painting that we were talking about earlier on, showing the porter welcoming us to the exhibition. Of course, this, I think, follows the introduction, so it's a nice welcome to the catalogue too. So that's the catalogue. So that's part 2. And we've got
There's
4
more.
minutes
Yeah,
left to tell
we
you
can do
about
this.
part 3.
We
and
can
do
do
it very
it, yeah.
quick. You go. This is your book.
So if an exhibition and a catalogue's not enough work, then we decided we'd like to do some more. And this history was so rich and so multi-layered that we wanted to think about another project which really encapsulated the research. So this idea came about of a chronicle, and it was Mark's idea, and I say that because when I'm editing at midnight, I think this was Mark's idea for sure. So the chronicle will be a digital publication, and again it will tell the history of the summer exhibition across its 250 years through entries for each year of 1,000 words, so telling us stories about the exhibition.
You've read some of them, haven't you?
Yes, we sent some of those. So again, this has been very much a Paul Mellon Centre project, and we couldn't have done this without our incredible colleagues. And it's really been, again, this idea of collaboration as method, as research method. I'm just giving some of my colleagues an advance warning because they're going to see themselves on the screen here. So we've been working, Jessica's there, who we've mentioned before, Maysoon Rahani, who's our picture researcher, because there is a lot of pictures to deal with in this project. Bailey Card, who's one of our editors and is project managing this process for us, and Tom Scott, our digital manager, who has really thought about helping us think about this as a digital research project. Alongside the artworks and the texts, well, actually, we should probably just say a bit about our designers first before
yes, we worked with Maysoon and Tom and Bailey and Jessica, as we've seen. We also have to do a shout out to an amazing colleague of ours, Tom Powell, who's been helping us and is here tonight helping us do a lot of research around the Chronicle. But we also thought that this has to be something that really looks beautiful and works beautifully. And so we found a design team, an amazing design team based in New York, in Brooklyn, New York, Charlotte Strick and Claire Williams. And we've been working with them, and Strick and Williams is the company, and you just show you the sorts of works. They've typically, in the past, they've been working together. Charlotte's been working as an art editor for the Paris Review, designing these really beautiful book covers too. So working with print and now digital media, and we've had a great relationship with them in terms of working on the design of the Chronicle. But as Sarah said, this is a huge digital publication, so we've also been working with a great company called Digerati. This is just a little fun image from their website, I guess symbolising well, I hope this is not too much of a hot air balloon ride for them, but it's, and that we don't go crashing to the earth or anything like that. But we've been working with Digerati too to generate what we think of will be a really innovative and distinctive contribution to art history. And this will be open access, it'll be free, and as you'll see in a moment, it combines a whole range of different things.
And live on beyond the exhibition as well. So we're showing you some of the
So these are some teaser slides. This is the sort of thing. So you may well land on a page like this. This could be something like this will be homepage for this website.
Yeah.
Sarah, do you want to take us through?
Yeah, and when you land on it, it will be electric salmon pink, which we've had many debates about, and then it will, as you move your mouse, it will change into full colour as well. So again, thinking about the digital experience, and our question when we're making digital publications is what can we do online that we can't do in print? And I think this has offered us, again, thinking about what we were doing in the catalogue, could we do something different? You can see the navigation is by decade, and again, when you hover on one of those, they open up into an entry for each year. And there are some authors sat here in the room, so they'll be interested to see how their work will be used. So here you can see that decade navigation. Again, thinking about the visitor, how will they use this? How can we move them through this information clearly and succinctly? Here's this 1,000-word text, a story about a particular year with 2 of the images, and then a year in context, giving people an overview. And one of the really exciting things for us in terms of research potential of this resource is we've visualised the data for every year of the exhibition. So visitor numbers, how many works were sold, how many works by members, RAs and non-members. So again, we see this as a kind of a resource for people to use.
So yes, I think just to re-emphasise that there'll be this text that an author, and we've had some amazing pieces of writing by, I think more than 80 people, 90 people
I think,
we've ended up commissioning for this, writing those 250 texts. Then we'll have, as Sarah says, all the year at the glance, that right-hand column where you see all this information visualised in really interesting ways, together with a short paragraph giving a broader context to the page. And then another thing that we've done.
Probably can't read that.
No.
It says explore the catalogue, and we have digitised every catalogue from 1769, and that's where Digirati and again the team at the RA, because the only full set of these exhibition catalogues in that 250-year history, they're physically at the RA, and so we've had it's been wonderful to collaborate with them and be able to digitise these and again provide them open access for people's research, and that research comes in many different forms. So there'll be Mark, still obsessed by Reynolds.
No.
I must find out when that portrait was exhibited, typing away, and it comes up, and the search will show you where Reynolds is in the catalogue, where Reynolds is in the text. But there'll also be people, the librarians at the RA told us that a lot of people researching family history use and often write to them with inquiries like, when did great Auntie Gertrude? I think she exhibited in the 1930s. And obviously, if someone's physically doing, like, Gertrude what, and all that, it's a huge labour for the staff at the RA. You can search that now. So it'll be really interesting.
Great Auntie Gertrude. Oh, well, there's about 17 of them.
Well, Gertrude will come up.
Yes.
So it'll be really interesting to see. What we want to do is put this out there and see what comes back, what people tell us about the work that they've done. And as a research centre, that's really important to us, isn't it? About how do we make collections and art history accessible to as many people as possible.
I think on that note, we'll finish. Thank you very much indeed.
Great. Thank you very much, Sarah and Mark. I am going to open up the floor for questions. And once again, if you could just wait until I get the mic to you so that the people at home can hear your questions. So.
Thank you. Going back to the very beginning of your talk, where you had the floor plan, and you ringed around a room that wasn't connected to the other, to the exhibition room.
Sorry to make people feel it.
Current summer exhibition, 2018.
Yeah.
Was I right in thinking that you were going to include that room as part of your exhibition?
We'd initially thought that, hadn't we? This is the lecture room. Yes, we thought. We thought we had this idea.
That one up there.
Yeah. The lecture room is a room that has even within the recent history of the summer exhibition, is a place where a curator has been allowed to experiment in slightly different ways. And so we initially discussed the possibility of doing a show that having a room in the heart of the summer exhibition that might mix together contemporary work with historical work from earlier periods. And so for a while we explored that idea, but in the end we decided not to pursue that.
And I think it just becomes too complicated because, again, the 2018 show, I know, you know, the academicians have just met. They've had over 20,000 submissions, and they're submitted digitally now rather than...
Problem of dual ticketing and all that.
Exactly. So what can you actually, you know, I think just the real practicalities of that came home to us. Yeah, yeah.
We thought so too, George. But
Yeah.
another year. I think we're doing it. I think there's so much going on with the two different exhibitions taking place side by side that hopefully, I mean, that crossover will take place through the walk between. I mean, the ideal I have is that all of you will decide to go to the Academy for the day, spend the morning at our show, have a nice lunch, and then come back to our show in the afternoon because it's been so brilliant. No, go then to the summer exhibition and enjoy that. So the flow into, our whole idea is that you'll walk through the history and then flow into the contemporary.
Maybe we could go as a group. Yes. You know, maybe we could go as a curator's tour.
I think so.
Yeah, now that's on you.
Yeah, our sixth lecture. Yeah.
This is a very, very, very silly question. Has the summer exhibition had always the same length?
In terms of its run dates, no. It was much shorter, I think, and it was opened in April in the 18th century, didn't it? So when summer, it's very interesting actually, sort of the weather and the environmental conditions have impacted on the summer. So it opened in April.
As well.
Yeah, the social season.
Yeah. So no, it always used to open at the end of April, April the 27th, 26th, that sort of time, run through to middle of June.
And then in the late 19th century, because of the popularity of the show, the committee decided to open it to include the August bank holiday, and it would close after that. And then it still closes in August now. So the June to August dates have become fairly set. And again, this idea that it kind of connects with other events of the summer, Wimbledon, Ascot, you know, and there's been often commentary by the academicians saying we've got to get rid of this image of the summer social season. And I think that's really, again, for me as an art historian who's interested in the kind of social history of art and how does art history connect with wider cultural issues, I think seeing it as what does the summer mean. And it is quite funny, actually, in terms of the subjects that are sent into the exhibition and this idea of whether an exhibition can kind of take the temperature of the art world or is a barometer somehow. Because I remember one of the coordinators writing, it was a very snowy winter, and therefore we got a lot of pictures of snow this year. Like, is that really true? But, you know, I just think that's fascinating.
We'll have climate change scientists combing our catalogues to
and
explore that.
actually often saying that when it was a rainy summer, the exhibition was more popular. That makes sense, doesn't it?
The digitalisation of the works, particularly those from the 20th century, did you strike any issues in copyright or rights or that may have impacted your selection of works or other...
Our picture researcher's just gone. Maybe she was anticipating your question. No, I think again, we have this issue because we publish, we have several digital publications, so I edit our online journal, and so again, we clear permissions and copyright for those, and as they're used, or for some works we use fair dealing, an exemption to copyright, the copyright law. So it's a case-by-case basis, but so far, again, I think there's a kind of cultural shift as well to the use of images online as we're using more digital publications. And so far, people want to be involved in this. And collections that own images, again, are interested that they can connect from their website. So far, it's been really positive, and that goes out to all our publications. But we're really interested in that idea about images online.
You have mentioned that in the digital version, so to speak, there will be mentions of works which have been sold or not sold. In your exhibition itself, are you also putting this sort of information as in... No. And the second thing, the Bowling and the Blake are now at the Tate.
Yes.
And were they bought directly at the Royal Academy?
No, they weren't, but some works were. And again, we tell this story of the Chancery bequest, which is a significant sum of money that was bequested by the sculptor Francis Chantry, and came into operation in the 19th century. And a lot of works were bought for the nation under the Chantry bequest directly from the summer exhibition. Again, this was a kind of point of contention because for a lot of artists and critics, they saw it as a little bit of a kind of insider job, and some works that they didn't think were of great enough quality were getting bought. So there was often like a lot of debate about what had been bought under the Chantry bequest. And again, it's quite interesting when you go around the Tate and you see a lot of work, say Chantry bequest, and then you can relate that history back to the summer exhibition. But no, those two examples weren't bought directly.
That was fabulous, thank you. I'm curious about your process. So sitting in the Royal Academy archive, and were you working through all of the catalogues and then choosing the pictures, but what degree of familiarity did you have with what the works look like, or then did you shortlist and then go away and digitally look for what the images look like?
Yeah, it's quite an interesting,
it was
different approaches, really.
I mean, in relation to the 18th and early 19th centuries, because I've worked on that field so long and on the subject of the Royal Academy exhibitions for so long, I felt that I had a very good knowledge of the works on display and the works that really stood out in that period. And so there it was more drawing. We went through all the catalogues, went looking down a list of pictures and then underlining the things that stood out and then starting to think about the ones that we might choose. For me, it was interesting because I've also ended up working on the more recent displays and on that final gallery and on the final section of the catalogue. And there it was much more about really trying to I really felt I needed to do a lot more research and get to find out a lot more about the individual pictures. But it was one of the things that we did do, of course, was to look at the press reviews for all these periods, including the most recent period. And we weren't entirely enslaved, as it were, to what the press were saying were the most important pictures, but we were certainly taking their responses into consideration, weren't we? That was something that we looked at, the pictures that seemed to strike a chord for the contemporary critic and for the contemporary visitor were certainly things that we took into account as we made our selection. Yeah,
I did do a bit more of like going, especially the illustrated. But again, that's a kind of selection, a curated show in its own right, the illustrated catalogue, as you know. But yeah, going through, it was really interesting as well, because just the process of doing that and your visual memory building up, and then thinking, oh, Sandra Blow, I didn't know she was there that early, or, you know, things like that. So you start to see those patterns as you do that. And again, with the press criticism, and this is to say thank you to Tom Powell as well, and another colleague, Sean Ketteringham. We've had a lot of help with this. Kind of, we were a little bit less familiar with the sort of 1950s, 60s, 70s, or the press for that period. And Tom and Sean, bless them, went and printed off nearly every piece of criticism they could find for us for every year. And we have these blue lever arch files of all that criticism, which we're going to put in the library and hope other people use, because, again, really they've just been invaluable for us doing that kind of research.
Thank you.
I think this will be the last question.
I think it all looks very wonderful, except that some of the pictures have been seen recently in other exhibitions that you've shown us. And yet there must be a lot of pictures out there that aren't so well known, that are hardly known, that are probably more difficult to find and more difficult to borrow. I can see that.
I think it's getting
but
that.
This, I can see one or two of my friends saying, oh, this wasn't such and such, and that wasn't such and such an exhibition, and expecting that you might have found rather different things that haven't been exhibited before.
Well, we've shown you a small snapshot.
Yeah, I realised that, yes.
And maybe we did
that,
choose,
yeah.
even in showing the things to you that we should. But I think we want, I mean, on the one hand, things, for instance, like Ramsgate Sands or the Pre-Raphaelites, or it would be very, very difficult. It would have been quite a strange story if we'd said we'll avoid those, but we'll find the things that are more obscure. So on the one hand, we wanted to showcase the works that really did make an impact, which sometimes and often actually are the works that you would have seen in a recent exhibition, I have to say. On the other hand, we've also found, both of us have really worked hard to find works that either we've never seen in recent exhibitions, or sometimes we'd never seen before, before we investigated them and made the loans. And so that are, we hope, real surprises. So for instance, for me, in that first exhibition gallery devoted to the Georgian period, that painting of the Dead Soldier by Joseph Ryder Darby, that is an amazing painting. It was hugely important, I think, in the history of late 18th century British art. It's not been seen at a recent exhibition, as far as I know, and we were able to borrow it from Michigan, and it's come from America, and that's a thing that I hope will surprise most people. Yeah.
And I think, there's Marjorie Sherlock, who, again, we borrowed that from the government art collection, and often these pictures that go sort of behind closed doors, or the Royal Collection, apart from their, when they organise exhibitions, sometimes it's hard to, unless you have access, you're friends with the Queen, you don't often see some of those works. So again, pulling things out from behind those closed doors, as well as regional galleries. So we're borrowing a work from the Usher Gallery in Lincoln, and that's really nice, those connections with those museums as well. So it's that balance, I think, that we're trying to, and as well the curators at the RA are very conscious about those works that people will know, and that they can use as a, to kind of get people like, you will recognise this, so come and have a look, and then find out some things. So again, that's been interesting for me as a process of curating exhibitions, that balance.
Yeah, one other thing that's quite interesting, and this links back to what we were talking about last week with the Hogarth show. The great majority of the Hogarth show in that Hogarth show are in public collections that everyone can see. But for the great majority of people who visited the show, it all felt new. They felt new because they were being put into a new context. And we hope that works that we are showing that maybe are relatively familiar and that are on display at the Tate even now will, in the context that we put them in, look entirely fresh. That, God, these are summer exhibition paintings. I would never have guessed that. And then when you see something that deals with modern political issues, for instance, you think, God, right through its history, the summer exhibition has showcased works that will deal with contemporary military or political issues. And so what we thought of as very new and contemporary and now actually fits into a much longer tradition. So I think often choosing a work and defamiliarising it through and putting it into a new context is one of the exciting things about doing an exhibition.
Yeah, and I think sort of works that, again, that we think we know well and were so controversial at the time. I think that's really interesting about why the Lewis portrait, it's quite a formal, traditional portrait in many ways, and I'm just really fascinated by, why does that at the Academy, light fires and cause huge rows and cause people to resign, and, real battles are fought over art. And so that's really, again, those contexts are really fascinating for us, aren't they, to kind of reconstruct and reimagine.
And what we want people to do is to go to the show, repeatedly of course, to buy the catalogue when they stumble out dazed into the shop and they're sort of so dreamy that they'll buy 4 or 5 copies. But then the important thing is also to read these. I mean, you've read some of just a very small selection of the works that Sarah and I have written for the Chronicle. You'll be getting lots of different voices. And we hope that the show and the Chronicle will work together, that people will carry on reading about it and be stimulated to find out more, and then suddenly find that through the means of the Chronicle, they've got this amazing 300,000 word plus resource that combines interpretation with this astonishing research base too. So we hope that all of them will link together and that the experiences will flow from one to the other.
Great, thank you very much, Sarah and Mark. And I hope you'll join us not next week, as we have
don't turn up next week.
But the week after, on April 5th, where Mark and George Shaw will be talking about the show that they're working on. That is going to be on at the YCBA 2019?
No,
Sorry, this year.
I wish it was 2019. No. It's in. Well, my editor certainly wishes it was in 2018, so I'd have more time to get it all done. But it's 2018 at YCBA, and then it's coming to Bath in the spring next year. George Shaw,
yes.
Amazing artist.
That'll be in 2019.
Yeah.
Right. So thank you very much, and have a good evening.
Thanks so much.
That was great fun.
That was so good. Good.